Hello friends, welcome to today's lecture on question banks. We'll do question banks from UWorld. So let's start. A 9-year-old boy with beta thalassemia major comes to the office for a routine red blood cell transfusion. He was diagnosed at age 6 months and has since received numerous blood transfusions and chelation therapies. The patient has tolerated each transfusion and chelation therapy well, with no immediate reactions or side effects. Vital signs are normal. On physical examination, the boy has mild frontal bossing, hepatosplenomegaly and jaundice. A recent liver biopsy showed Kupffer cells containing coarse yellowish-brown cytoplasmic granules. The granules are most likely composed of which of the following? So, the child suffering from beta thalassemia major indicates that the child has chronic hemolytic condition, and for treatment, he receives routine RBC transfusion. Now, the routine RBC transfusion means that we are giving the bags of iron, that is RBCs, to the child routinely. So, as we all know that the iron has no way to get out of the body, they start to accumulate in the body if given at very routine manner, and also the liver biopsy showing the Kupffer cells containing yellowish brown cytoplasmic granules. It actually indicates the iron overload condition where there is a condition of hemosiderosis, where the hemosiderin starts accumulating, and thus the answer to this question is F, hemosiderin. Patients with chronic hemolytic anemia, example in cases of beta thalassemia major, depend on recurrent red blood cell transfusions to maintain an adequate hemoglobin level. Iron overload, that is hemosiderosis from increased iron absorption, is a common complication resulting from both the primary condition, that is hemolysis, and its treatment, that is frequent RBC transfusions. Circulating iron is carried by transferrin. Once deposited in cells, iron binds to apoferritin to form ferritin micelles. Because iron is utilized poorly in patients with thalassemia and cannot be excreted actively, the ferritin micelles accumulate in macrophages of the reticuloendothelial system. The resulting iron storage complex is known as hemosiderin and microscopically appears as brown or yellowish brown pigments in either granular or crystalline form. Hemosiderin can be identified histologically with a Prussian blue stain. In the liver, hemosiderin is typically seen in Kupffer cells, that are hepatic macrophages, which lines the walls of the sinusoid, and they participate in RBC breakdown. Patients receiving regular transfusions should undergo routine iron chelation therapy to reduce the overall iron load within the body and improve survival. Eventually, the iron burden will overwhelm the reticuloendothelial cells' capacity to sequester iron, resulting in parenchymal iron overload in the liver, myocardium, skin, and pancreas, example in Brown's diabetes. Other choices were inappropriate, as in choice A, amyloid protein has a pale rose color after Congo red staining. Accumulation of amyloid fibrils can result in a variety of sequelae, example cardiomyopathy and nephrotic syndrome. In choice B, bilirubin is the primary pigment found within bile and is a byproduct of hemoglobin breakdown. Hemolytic anemia commonly results in indirect hyperbilirubinemia and jaundice. In choice C, copper accumulation is seen in Wilson disease, which is an autosomal recessive disease characterized by cirrhosis and neurologic complications. In choice D, glycogen appears as clear cytoplasmic vacuoles and stains pinkish purple with the periodic acid Schiff reaction. Glycogen is abundant in the liver shortly after a meal. In choice E, patients with Gaucher disease or glucocerebrosidase enzyme deficiency have pancytopenia, hepatosplenomegaly, and pathologic fractures. The cardinal histologic findings are Gaucher cells, which are macrophages laden with cerebrocytes and other glycolipids. In choice G, Lipofuscin is an insoluble yellow-brown pigment composed of lipids and phospholipids, which are complexed with proteins. This pigment accumulates with age and wear tear of multiple organs. In summary, iron overload or hemosiderosis is a common and serious complication of chronic hemolytic anemia and frequent blood transfusions. Hemosiderin accumulation is the cardinal histologic finding. Chelation therapy is indicated to reduce parenchymal iron deposition. Now this picture demonstrates hepcidin and body iron regulation. The food iron comes in two forms, in heme form, that is in Fe2 plus state, or in non-heme form, that is Fe3 plus state. The Fe2 plus state gets directly absorbed into the gut, whereas non-heme iron form, that is Fe3 plus state, needs to be first reduced to Fe2 plus state and then it gets absorbed into the gut. And the enzyme that is responsible for this reduction is ferrireductase. Once the iron or Fe2 plus gets into the enterocyte, it binds to the ferritin, and after it gets bind to ferritin, whenever there is need for the iron, the ferroportin 1 receptors gets activated or it gets opened up and allows the Fe2 plus to get into the blood, where it is then transported with the help of transferrin. Same is the case in macrophages. In macrophages, the iron is bounded with ferritin, and whenever there is need for the iron, this ferroportin 1 channels open up in the macrophages so that it also allows the Fe2 plus from the macrophages to get into the blood. The liver secrete the hepcidin molecules which inhibit the ferroportin 1 opening and therefore inhibit the entry of Fe2 plus into the blood. The release of hepcidin from liver is mainly seen in cases of anemia of chronic disease, where the chronic disease results in production of this acute phase reactants from the liver, including hepcidin, and then the hepcidin sequesters iron in storage sites, limiting the iron transfer from macrophages to the erythroid precursors, thereby leading to anemia. In this question, a 34-year-old man with unremarkable past medical history is evaluated for an enlarged lymph node in his anterior cervical chain that measures 4 cm in diameter. The patient first felt the lymph node several weeks ago and states that it has been steadily increasing in size. He is concerned about whether or not he has cancer. The patient is referred to a specialist for surgical removal of the enlarged node. Biopsy reveals abnormal lymph node architecture and numerous lymphocytes. Which of the following, if present, would be the most consistent with malignancy in this patient? Now, the lymph node enlargement in the patient can occur in the patient either of the two ways. It could be due to antigenic stimulation or it could be malignancy. When it is due to antigenic stimulation, the lymph node enlargement is known as reactive hyperplasia, and when in malignancy it is malignant. So how to differentiate whether it is antigenic enlargement of the lymph node or the malignant? Whenever there is antigenic enlargement of the lymph node, there is reactive hyperplasia, that is, there is increase in the size and the number of cells of different varieties, and therefore they are usually polyclonal. Whereas when it is due to malignancy, usually one of the cell undergo the differentiation and therefore they are monoclonal. So the main difference that divides the antigenic lymph node enlargement and the malignant is monoclonality or the polyclonality. So the answer here will be monoclonal T cell receptor gene rearrangement that would demonstrate the malignancy. Lymphadenopathy can represent inflammatory changes within the lymph node, that is reactive hyperplasia or malignant transformation. Reactive hyperplasia is a broad term that encompasses all benign, reversible enlargement of the lymphoid tissue secondary to an antigen stimulus. The nodal response to antigenic stimuli is highly variable and can be classified as follicular hyperplasia, sinus hyperplasia, or diffuse hyperplasia. Follicular hyperplasia occurs when the follicles increase in size and number, whereas sinus hyperplasia occurs when the sinuses enlarge and fill with histiocytes. Diffuse hyperplasia is observed when the nodal architecture is diffusely effaced by sheets of lymphocytes, immunoblasts, and macrophages. When malignant transformation occurs, as in lymphomas, the normal lymph node architecture is distorted or effaced by the proliferation of malignant lymphoid cells, often to a greater extent than that seen with reactive hyperplasia. Malignancy-associated effacement of nodal architecture may be follicular or diffuse. Reactive lymphoid hyperplasia is polyclonal in that it consists of a proliferation of many different cell types within the lymph node. For each type of lymphocyte responding to an antigenic stimulus, multiple genetically distinct cells of that variety undergo limited monoclonal expansion, leading to an overall polyclonal response. Malignant transformation, in contrast, is monoclonal in that it results from the unchecked proliferation of a single genetically unique cell from only one cell line. Evaluation of monoclonality of the lymphocyte population is an important characteristic when lymphoma is suspected. The clonality of a T cell population is assessed by molecular methods such as PCR that examine the rearrangement of T cell receptor genes. If a single allele for the V region of the T cell receptor predominates in a lymphocytic population, monoclonal proliferation is suspected. The same principle applies when assessing B cell clonality. Monoclonal rearrangement of the genes for immunoglobulin variable regions is suggestive of a B cell lymphoma. Of the choices given, monoclonal TCR gene rearrangement is most indicative of malignant processes, especially in the context of appropriate clinical features, that is weight loss, night sweats, fever, and anorexia. Other choices were incorrect, as in choices A, B, and C. Pleomorphism, increased mitosis, and nuclear changes are all commonly seen in the lymphocytes of a reactive hyperplastic lymph node. These findings do not automatically classify the specimen as malignant. In choice C, an admixture of several lymphoid cell types in a lymph node is suggestive of a benign process. A predominantly monomorphic cell population is indicative of malignancy and is characteristic of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. Hodgkin's lymphoma does demonstrate an admixture of several lymphoid cell types within the lymph nodes. However, this finding does not distinguish Hodgkin's lymphoma from reactive hyperplasia. Additionally, genetic analysis of Reed-Sternberg cells most often reveals monoclonal characteristics. In summary, benign lymph node enlargement in response to antigenic stimulation is associated with a polyclonal proliferation of lymphocytes. A monoclonal lymphocytic proliferation is a strong evidence of malignancy. In this question, a 52-year-old man comes to the physician complaining of dizziness, headaches, and pruritus after showering. He has smoked half a pack of cigarette daily for the past 15 years and drinks alcohol socially. Physical examination shows a ruddy complexion and mild splenomegaly. Lab results are as follows. Hemoglobin is 19 gram per deciliter, that is increased. Hematocrit is increased. Erythrocytes is also increased. Platelets and leukocytes is also increased. Which of the following is the most likely cause of this patient's finding? Since all the cell types is increased, that is the RBCs is also increased, the platelets count is also increased, and the leukocyte count is also increased, the most likely cause of the patient finding will be increased bone marrow sensitivity to the growth factor, and thus the answer is C. Now this slide demonstrates the causes of polycythemia. They can be relative polycythemia, where the etiology is due to dehydration or excessive diuresis. In this, the plasma volume is decreased, but the RBC mass is normal, SaO2 is normal, and EPO or erythropoietin level is also normal. In primary polycythemia, The etiology is polycythemia vera, and in this the plasma volume is increased, RBC mass increased, SaO2 is normal with APO decreased. In secondary polycythemia, the etiology could be physiological. Example, in cases of hypoxia, where there is normal plasma volume, increased RBC mass, decreased SaO2, and increased erythropoietin level. Whereas it can also be inappropriate. Example, in EPO producing tumors, where the plasma volume is normal, RBC mass is increased, SaO2 normal, and EPO is increased. The primary and secondary polycythemias are absolute polycythemias. Polycythemia vera is a clonal myeloproliferative disease of pluripotent hematopoietic stem cells. Approximately 95% of patients with PV have a V617F mutation involving the JAK2 gene. This mutation replaces a valine with phenylalanine at the 617 position, rendering hematopoietic cells more sensitive to growth factors such as erythropoietin and thrombopoietin. PV presents with increased RBC mass, increased plasma volume, and low erythropoietin levels. Additional manifestation can include an elevated platelet and/or WBC count, thrombotic events from blood hyperviscosity, peptic ulceration, and pruritus due to histamine release from basophils, and gouty arthritis from increased cell turnover. Physical examination typically shows a plethoric, ruddy face and splenomegaly. Diagnosis is established by confirming low serum erythropoietin levels and bone marrow aspiration cytogenetic studies showing a JAK2 mutation. Treatment involves serial phlebotomy as necessary to keep the hematocrit less than 45%. Other options were incorrect, as in choice A. Dehydration or excessive diuresis can also cause elevated hematocrit, mild leukocytosis, and thrombocytosis due to low effective circulating volume. However, splenomegaly and symptoms such as pruritus are not seen, and hence it was not appropriate. In choice B, hypoxia is a strong stimulus for erythropoietin production. SaO2 less than 92%, that is partial oxygen pressure less than 65 mmHg, appears to be the threshold for the development of physiologic secondary polycythemia. Conditions such as chronic obstructive pulmonary disease and obstructive sleep apnea can cause secondary polycythemia. However, this will not cause leukocytosis or thrombocytosis or splenomegaly, and hence it was not appropriate. In choice D, increased red cell lifespan would not be expected to cause leukocytosis and thrombocytosis, hence it was not appropriate. In choice E, erythropoietin producing tumors, example renal cell carcinoma or hepatocellular carcinoma, can cause inappropriate secondary polycythemia due to abnormal erythropoietin production. Workup will show an elevated erythropoietin level. Again, the combination of multiple elevated cell lines and splenomegaly is unlikely to result from a process causing secondary polycythemia, and hence it is also not appropriate. All in all, the summary says that the polycythemia vera is a clonal myeloproliferative disease of pluripotent hematopoietic stem cell. Characteristic features include an increased RBC mass, increased plasma volume, and low erythropoietin levels. The majority of patients with PV have the JAK2 V617F mutation, rendering hematopoietic stem cells more sensitive to growth factors. Secondary polycythemia is a misnomer, since not all polycell line are increased but only red cells. A better term is secondary erythrocytosis. In this question, a 23-year-old African American man comes to the emergency department due to back and lower extremity pain for 2 days. He has had several similar episodes over the last 15 years that have required hospitalization. His pain is not responsive to over-the-counter analgesics, and review of his prior records shows that he has needed treatment with opioids for adequate pain relief. The patient does not use tobacco, alcohol, or illicit drugs. On physical examination, he has scleral tears and tenderness over his lower back and long bones of his thighs. Lab evaluation shows a hemoglobin level of 6.7 gram per deciliter. Histopathologic evaluation of the patient's spleen is most likely to reveal which of the following. So, an African American man suffering from back and lower pain with jaundice and low hemoglobin level all is suggestive for sickle cell disease, and thus the patient's spleen will reveal fibrosis and atrophy. Now, this patient with frequent episodes of bony pain likely has sickle cell disease, which is an autosomal recessive condition characterized by hemolytic anemia and vasoocclusion. Hemolytic anemia causes jaundice and pigmented gallstones. Vasoocclusion leads to hypoxia and acidosis, causing pain. Microvascular occlusion can affect the spleen due to trapping of the sickle cells by the rigid splenic cords, and thus the autoinfarction begins in early childhood and can precipitate splenic sequestration crisis in infants. However, repeated infarction leads to atrophy and fibrosis of the spleen, which is seen in the adult patients. Asplenic patients are more susceptible to infections with encapsulated bacteria. Example, group B: Streptococcus, Haemophilus influenzae, Streptococcus pneumoniae, Neisseria meningitis, and Salmonella typhi. The other options were incorrect, as in choice A. Splenic congestion occurs during a splenic sequestration crisis, marked hemoglobin decrease and enlarging spleen, which develops due to vasoocclusion within the cords of Billroth and splenic pooling of erythrocytes. However, repeated infarction leads to functional asplenia and autosplenectomy by late childhood or adolescence. Now, in choices B and D, splenic cyst formation typically occurs due to infection. Splenic infiltration can be seen with metastatic neoplasm, but it is not a feature of sickle cell disease. In choice C, the white pulp of the spleen is composed of lymphoid tissue, and lymphoid hyperplasia may represent infection or malignancy. In summary, sickle cell disease is characterized by repeated splenic infarctions that ultimately result in splenic atrophy and fibrosis, that is typically completed by the late childhood. After autosplenectomy, patients are predisposed to infections with encapsulated bacterial organisms. The question is continued, and in this, the patient is admitted to the hospital and receives opioid analgesics and intravenous fluid. He has no evidence of active infection. His hemoglobin electrophoresis results are consistent with sickle cell disease. Further laboratory evaluation shows a mean corpuscular volume of 113 micrometer cube and a reticulocyte index of 1.5, which is low given the patient's severe anemia. Which of the following is the most likely cause of the patient's macrocytosis? Now, the patient with sickle cell disease has chronic hemolysis, and due to this chronic hemolysis, there is increased erythrocyte turnover requiring increased amount of folic acid. Thus, in patients with such chronic hemolytic conditions, there is usually folic acid deficiency that could lead to macrocytosis, and thus in this patient also the macrocytosis is due to increased folic acid requirement. Now, this patient has macrocytic anemia since the mean corpuscular volume is greater than 100 micrometer cube. Severe macrocytosis is considered when MCV is greater than 110 micrometer cube, and it is usually due to megaloblastic anemia, a subtype of macrocytic anemia which causes impaired DNA synthesis. Cytoplasmic components then accumulate within the slowly dividing erythrocytes, producing cells that are larger than normal, that is, macrocytes. Patients with sickle cell disease or other hemolytic anemias have increased folic acid requirements due to increased erythrocyte turnover. As such, they are prone to developing relative folic acid deficiency and leading to thus megaloblastic anemia. Other options were incorrect, as in choice A. Extramedullary erythropoiesis can occur in sickle cell disease and lead to elevated reticulocyte count and MCV, as the reticulocytes produced are larger than those released by the bone marrow. However, this patient's low reticulocyte index suggests an inadequate response to anemia and a lack of erythropoiesis. In choice C, patients with SCD may receive multiple transfusions for treatment of severe or symptomatic anemia. Then the transfusion-related iron overload can cause severe liver disease but would be unlikely to produce MCV of greater than 110, and thus it was not appropriate. In choice D, macrocytosis can occur in liver failure due to increase in circulating phospholipids and cholesterol that adsorb onto erythrocytes, resulting in membrane expansion. However, liver-associated macrocytosis is generally mild, that is, it is less than 110 micrometer cube, and this patient does not have any findings to suggest advanced liver disease such as ascites, edema, or bleeding, and hence it was not appropriate. In choice E, a disease of the elderly, myelodysplastic syndrome, can cause macrocytic anemia in the setting of a young patient with SCD and hemolytic anemia. However, folic acid deficiency is much more likely, and thus it was not appropriate. In summary, a MCV of greater than 110 micrometer cube is highly suggestive of megaloblastic anemia, such as that caused by folic acid or vitamin B12 deficiency. Patients with chronic hemolytic anemia have increased folic acid requirements due to increased erythrocyte turnover, and this predisposed to developing macrocytosis. So in this question, a 6-year-old son is brought to the pediatrician for recurrent nosebleed, and he reveals diffuse petechiae. Lab results show hemoglobin to be low, platelet count is low, and leukocyte count is increased. Bone marrow aspiration reveals the following. The large cells at the center of the slide demonstrate positive immunostaining for terminal deoxynucleotidal transferase. Now they express surface CD19 and CD10 as well. So what is the most likely diagnosis? TDT positive cells are lymphoblasts. Now they can either be B lymphoblasts or T cell lymphoblasts. Now B cell lymphoblasts has the surface antigen to be CD19 or CD10 or CD20, whereas the T cell lymphoblast has CD5, 4, 6, 7 or 8. Thus the answer to this question is A, precursor B cell leukemia. Now the bone marrow blasts can either be lymphoblast or myeloblast. If they are lymphoblast, they are TDT positive, and if they are myeloblast, they has peroxidase positive granules and especially the OR rods. Now the lymphoblast can either be a precursor of B cell type or precursor of T cell type. So if they are precursors of B cell type, then the surface antigen will be CD19 or CD10 or CD20. Whereas if they are precursor of T cell type, then the CD markers would be CD1 plus 2 plus 3, 4, 5, 7 or 8. Please note that in choice C, mature B cell leukemia would have the B lymphocytes in the peripheral blood, bone marrow and lymph nodes, as well as the neoplastic. This B lymphocytes actually express the markers CD19 and CD5 on their surface. So they co-express the markers of both the B cell, that is CD19, and the T cell, that is CD5. And in choice D, the mature T cell leukemia is a group of uncommon neoplasms that are derived from mature or post-thymic T cells, and the findings would include more of mature lymphocytes and not the blasts, and thus it was not appropriate. Now in the next question, a 3-year-old boy comes to the emergency department because of problem of oral bleeding after a tooth extraction. The bleeding has persisted for approximately 30 minutes despite application of constant pressure with gauze, and there is no past medical or surgical history, no medications, and his vaccinations are up to date. Blood pressure is 90 by 60 mmHg, pulse is 100 per minute. On physical examination, he has slow oozing of blood at the site of dental extraction. Family history is significant for a maternal uncle who suffered from recurrent bleeding into his joints. So which of the following is the most likely to be abnormal in this patient? Now the recurrent bleeding from joints that suggest of hemarthrosis, and this is mainly seen in cases where there is clotting factor deficiency. And when there is clotting factor deficiency, either the partial thromboplastin time or the prothrombin time could be elevated. Now, since the boy has some inherited disease that has led to the oral bleeding after the tooth extraction, the most appropriate option here is increase in the partial thromboplastin time. This could either be due to hemophilia A or hemophilia B. Hemophilia A, which means factor 8 deficiency, and hemophilia B, that is the factor 9 deficiency. Now, the hemophilia A and B, the inheritance pattern is X-linked recessive. The clinical features include delayed or prolonged bleeding after mild trauma, hemarthrosis or intramuscular hematomas, GIT or genitourinary tract bleedings, and intracranial hemorrhage. The complication is hemophilic arthropathy. Lab findings include increased activated PTT, normal platelet count, and prothrombin time, but absent or decreased factor 8 in cases of hemophilia A and factor 9 in cases of hemophilia B. The treatment is factor replacement or desmopressin for mild hemophilia A. Please note that the patients with hemophilia have normal platelet function and they can form a platelet plug, so bleeding after procedures can be delayed rather than immediate, in contrast to patients with platelet disorders. Now, in this question, a 63-year-old man comes due to abdominal pain. The lab findings shows hemoglobin to be low, platelets low, total bilirubin to be increased, lactate dehydrogenase increased, and haptoglobin is also low. On further investigation, the angiography of the abdomen reveals mesenteric vein thrombosis, and the flow cytometry shows absence of CD55 on surface of red blood cells. So, which of the following is most likely pathologic renal finding in this patient? Now, all this lab finding is suggestive of hemolytic anemia, as well as the CD55 absence suggests of paroxysmal nocturnal hemoglobinuria. Thus, the most likely pathologic renal finding will be B. Hemosiderosis. So, the patient is suffering from paroxysmal nocturnal hemoglobinuria, which is a complement-mediated hemolytic disease, and it is due to mutated PIGA gene, which synthesizes GPI that anchors proteins such as cell surface proteins, example CD55, which is a decay accelerating factor, and CD59, which is a MAC inhibitory protein. This actually helps in inactivation of complement. If there is absence of such proteins, it leads to complement mediated hemolysis. And thus the manifestation of PNH include hemolytic anemia, hemoglobinuria, and also thrombosis at atypical sites like hepatic, portal or cerebral veins due to release of prothrombotic factors from the lysed RBCs and platelets. Also, it leads to pancytopenia due to stem cell injury. And this chronic hemolysis lead to breakdown of iron containing erythrocytes, leading to iron deposition in the kidney, that is hemosiderosis, which can interfere with proximal tubule function, causing interstitial scarring and cortical infarcts. Thus, the hemosiderosis combined with microvascular thrombosis increases the risk of chronic kidney disease in patients with PNH. This is all for today. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, please do subscribe and share.